Tonight, as casualties mount in Iraq and Afghanistan, are wounded soldiers being given the help and treatment they need? This veteran from the recent Iraq war says he was abandoned by the state after being injured. How typical is he? We asked General Sir Mike Jackson. Elements of the Royal Ulster Constabulary are shown to have colluded in and covered up for murder. Why has no one been charged or even disciplined? And we talk to the legendary actor Peter O'Toole about his life and loves.
I know nothing at all about women. Nothing. Not a sausage.
But is it fair to say you've made a fairly thorough study?
Done the best I can under the limited circumstances.
Good evening. 133 civilians were reported dead today in Iraq. That is, of course, more than the total number of British servicemen and women to have been killed there in nearly 4 years. But it's a stark illustration that their task is far from over. In addition to British deaths in Iraq and Afghanistan, there have been more than 3,000 casualties last year alone. And there's a growing chorus saying that the injured aren't receiving the help and care they feel they're entitled to expect. This is the statue of an abandoned soldier commissioned for a BBC documentary to be broadcast in May. It's rallying support among ex-servicemen who feel let down. In a moment, the former head of the Army, Sir Mike Jackson, will tell us what he thinks has gone wrong, and I'll be talking to the Veterans Minister. First, though, Tim Hewell reports.
For it's Tommy this and Tommy that, and chuck him out, the brute. But it's saviour of his country when the guns begin to shoot. And it's Tommy this and Tommy that, and anything you please. And Tommy ain't a bloomin' fool. You bet that Tommy sees.
In battle they were heroes. Back home they feel like nobodies. Kipling reported that sense of injustice from the trenches of the First World War. It was expressed just as acutely this weekend in Trafalgar Square by veterans of the Falklands and Bosnia, Afghanistan and Iraq. As part of a BBC documentary, they put up a temporary statue, not to a dead comrade, but to a living one, a young soldier injured in Iraq, who represents, they say, all those denied proper care by the country they served.
I actually thought I was dead because all I could see was blue sky. I had no sensation other than the fact I could see blue sky. I had injuries to my spine, my knees, my shoulders. I had some internal injuries that have affected my bowels, my bladder and my stomach. Then within 24 hours I was sent over to Cyprus, and then from Cyprus on to the UK. And the treatment up to that point I thought was actually very good. But when I got back to the UK, I was basically taken to A&E in the middle of the night in Selly Oak in Birmingham. Eventually handed a walking stick and told to go home and see the GP.
Scott Garthley, wounded on the first day of the invasion of Iraq, would later need 17 surgical operations, all paid for privately because he says the NHS waiting list was too long. That wouldn't have happened, he believes, if there'd been a military hospital available. But 7 of the 8 remaining in Britain have closed since the early 1990s, and the last in Gosport will follow shortly. The move to treat soldiers in the NHS follows the recommend of a Conservative government defence review in 1994, though Britain's been involved in ever more overseas conflicts since then. And many men wounded in earlier wars, like Denzel Connick, who lost his left leg in the Falklands, never stop needing specialised treatment.
The pain that I have at the moment is caused through a nerve which has become exposed in the stump remaining of my leg. It's very, very painful and causes me a lot of lack of sleep. The pain is ridiculous. I've been waiting now for over 7 months to see a specialist, a neurosurgeon, who would be looking at the possibility of surgery to treat it.
The services of the dead are engraved in stone. The wounded only have bits of paper to enshrine their rights. This document is supposed to ensure priority treatment for war pensioners on the NHS. But veterans say that since a change in legislation a couple of years ago, pensions are increasingly hard to obtain. And there's evidence that the NHS doesn't always observe these guidelines.
Well, the main change for us in terms of how war pensions are paid is that the burden of proof has now changed. Whereas in the old war pension scheme, the claimant was given quite a lot of reasonable doubt. The claimant now has to claim on the balance of probabilities that their injury or illness has been caused from service.
The Army still has a specialised rehabilitation centre for men wounded in battle, but the introduction of the new pension system has led to a fourfold increase in the proportion of claims rejected, and many hospitals have made clear that despite the law, even those who do have a war pension will necessarily get priority treatment in the NHS.
When people are presenting to the NHS, they are simply being told that we base our priority on clinical need, and therefore this, the fact that you're in receipt of a war pension isn't going to have any effect on whether or not you get priority treatment within the NHS. This is complicated further by the fact that primary care trusts are given quite a lot of autonomy for running services within their own locality.
If somebody has a life-threatening condition that needs immediate treatment, that person must go to the top of the list, and quite rightly so. However, that's no consolation for people who fought for their country and requires treatment for their conditions that have been caused through that service when they're put on waiting lists which just drag on and drag on.
Did you have these cases back together?
Selly Oak Hospital in Birmingham, where Prince Charles has visited wounded veterans, has been treating returning soldiers alongside civilians, but it's now going to have a unit with military nurses and military managers at all levels. That'll please veterans who say injured servicemen are more comfortable in a military setting, but they'll still be treated by NHS medical staff, part of a specialist trauma and burns team.
During peacetime, the number of serious injuries that go through military hospitals isn't at the level that an NHS hospital would see, and therefore they're not getting the range of experience in treatment and care that perhaps staff in an NHS hospital would.
You all have stood up.
The demand among many veterans, though, is for a return to military hospitals, not just for current servicemen, but also for those who've been medically discharged. The clamour will probably grow as casualties in Afghanistan and Iraq increase. But for ex-servicemen and women like these, it's not just a question of adequate facilities, it's also a matter of respect.
Well, before we came on the air, I spoke to the former head of the Army, General Sir Mike Jackson, from his home in Wiltshire. I asked him if he believed it had been a mistake to have closed the military hospitals.